The morning of October 14th, 2021 started like any other on Cedarwood Lane. Sprinklers running, jays calling from the oak trees, the smell of coffee drifting through screen doors left open to catch the last of the autumn breeze. And then, a pearl-white 2021 Tesla Model X parked dead center across the driveway at 4 Cedarwood Lane for the 48th time in 14 months. The man who lived at that address walked out his front door at 6:03 a.m. He was 61 years old. He moved with a slight hitch in his left knee, an old gift from a street in Fallujah. He was carrying a thermos of black coffee and a manila folder so thick it had to be held with both hands. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch the car. He looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then he sat down on his porch steps, opened the folder, and waited. By 7:45 a.m., 2 Buncombe County Sheriff's cruisers, 1 code enforcement vehicle, and a black Chevy Suburban with federal plates were parked on Cedarwood Lane. The man in the Tesla never saw it coming. But let me tell you, he should have. Cedarwood Lane sits in the northeast corner of Weaverville, North Carolina, a small town of about 4,000 souls tucked just 12 miles outside Asheville, up where the Blue Ridge Mountains start to fold into themselves and the air smells like pine resin and wood smoke for 6 months of the year. It is, by most measures, exactly the kind of street that no longer exists in most of America. 11 houses, all of them built between 1978 and 1985. 2-car garages, deep front porches, yards wide enough that you could throw a baseball without hitting a fence. Most of the original families were still there, the Garcias at number 7, the Pattersons at number 2, old Margaret Howell at number 11 with her bird feeders and her 2 cats and her Tuesday morning gossip over the back fence. In October, the sugar maples on that street turned the color of fire. The whole lane went gold and orange and red, and people drove slowly past just to look at it. Neighbors waved at each other, really waved, not the 2-finger steering wheel lift, but an actual hand raised, sometimes with a word hollered across the yard. Kids rode bikes on the sidewalk until dusk. Dogs knew the whole block by smell. It was, in the language of people who grew up in such places, a good street. And then, in August of 2020, the house at number 6 went up for sale. Let me tell you about the man at number 4. His name was Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Earl Doss, United States Marine Corps, retired. He enlisted at 18 years old in 1978 out of Brevard, North Carolina, a mountain boy who'd grown up hunting deer and fixing cars and hadn't really thought much about college. The recruiter at the Asheville office told him the Marines would make a man out of him. They were not wrong. Raymond Doss served for 26 years. He went to Beirut in 1983, arrived 4 months after the bombing of the Marine barracks, and spent 3 months in rubble and grief and the particular quiet that follows mass death. He went to Kuwait in 1991 as a staff sergeant, led a rifle platoon through the liberation of Kuwait City, came home with a Navy Commendation Medal and a hearing loss in his right ear that never fully recovered. He went to Iraq in 2003. He was 43 years old and could have stayed stateside. He volunteered anyway. His platoon called him Gunny Ray. They said he was the kind of man who made other men brave just by standing next to them. He came home from Fallujah in 2004 with a piece of insurgent shrapnel removed from his left knee and a quietness behind his eyes that his late wife, Carol, said arrived on the plane with him and never quite left. He retired in 2004, Staff Sergeant, Gunnery Sergeant by the time he processed out, 26 years, 3 combat deployments, 8 ribbons, 2 Presidential Unit citations, 1 Navy Commendation Medal, 1 Purple Heart. He and Carol moved to Cedarwood Lane in 2006. Carol had grown up in Weaverville. She said she wanted to die somewhere she could see the mountains from the kitchen window. She got her wish, though not the way either of them intended. Carol Doss passed from pancreatic cancer in February of 2018. She was 57 years old. Raymond stayed. He converted Carol's flower garden along the south fence into a memorial garden, 12 rose bushes, 1 for every month they'd spent apart during deployments. He tended them with the same precision he'd once applied to field stripping a rifle. He knew each bush by the year he'd planted it, by the color of its bloom, by the name he'd quietly given it in his own mind. He walked his dog, a 3-year-old chocolate lab named Corporal, twice a day, rain or shine. He built furniture in his garage workshop on weeknights. Adirondack chairs, mostly. He gave them to neighbors, to the church on Mill Road, to the veterans' shelter in Asheville. On Tuesday evenings, he drove to the VA in Asheville for a group session, a PTSD support group he'd been attending since 2005. He didn't talk about it, but he didn't hide it either. He told Margaret Howell over the fence once, "It's not weakness to admit your engine runs a little rough sometimes." The kids on the block adored him. He knew all of their names. He kept a jar of wrapped candy just inside the front door for Halloween, and he carved pumpkins on the porch every October with whoever wanted to help. He was not a loud man, he was not a flashy man. But the people who knew Raymond Doss knew something else about him, something that mattered. He had a notebook on the kitchen counter that he'd been writing in every single day since 1978. Dates, times, observations, details. 26 years in the Corps had made documentation a reflex. That notebook, remember that notebook, it matters more than you know. The house at number 6 sold in late August of 2020. The listing had been up for 3 days. Cash offer over asking. The realtor told Margaret Howell it was the fastest sale she'd seen on that street in 20 years. Margaret told everyone else. The moving truck arrived on a Saturday, not one of the big orange rental jobs, but a professional white-glove moving company, 3 men in matching shirts with the word Apex stitched on the breast pocket. They carried wrapped furniture, crated art, boxes labeled in a custom font. The Tesla pulled up behind it. Not a Model 3, not a Model Y. A pearl-white 2021 Tesla Model X, the big one, with the falcon wing doors that opened like something from a science fiction film. It sat in the driveway of number 6 like it was trying to make a point. The man who got out of it was 34 years old, 6 feet tall, with the kind of physique that suggested a personal trainer and a meal prep service and absolutely zero manual labor. He was wearing a fitted black quarter-zip, Ray-Ban aviators, and the particular expression of someone who has spent most of his life being told he was extraordinary. His name was Bryce Langford Weston III. Let me say that again because it matters, the third. Bryce Weston had made his money, approximately $14 million of it, according to the Crunchbase profile he'd personally edited 17 times, as the co-founder of a SaaS analytics company called Velometric based in Charlotte. The company did something involving real-time marketing attribution. Nobody on Cedarwood Lane entirely understood what that meant. What they understood was that Bryce talked about it constantly and expected them to be impressed. He'd bought the house at number 6, he told the movers loudly enough for 3 neighboring yards to hear, as a secondary property. His primary residence was a 3,000-square-foot loft in Charlotte's Noda neighborhood. Cedarwood Lane was for decompressing. Raymond Doss walked over that first Saturday to introduce himself. He brought a plate of Carol's banana bread recipe. He still made it every few weeks because the smell of it made the house feel inhabited. Bryce Weston looked at the plate, then he looked at Raymond. "Thanks," he said, not reaching for it. "We're actually doing pretty clean eating right now, but thanks." He went back inside. Raymond stood on the sidewalk for a moment with the plate. Then he took it to the Garcias at number 7 instead. Their 4-year-old Louis ate 3 slices. That was the first red flag. It was not the last. It started with the driveway. Cedarwood Lane has a particular geography worth understanding. The houses at numbers 4 and 6 are directly adjacent, separated by a narrow side yard. Their driveways run parallel, close enough that a wide vehicle parked toward the center line risks overlapping the neighbor's apron, the stretch of concrete between the street and the property line. Bryce Weston's Tesla was, by factory specification, 83 inches wide, with the mirrors extended, wider still. The first time Bryce parked it blocking Raymond's driveway was on a Wednesday evening in late September 2020. Not fully blocking, maybe 18 inches of overlap. Enough that Raymond's 2009 Ford F-150 couldn't clear the apron without risking a scrape. Raymond walked over, knocked on the door. Bryce answered in a hoodie, earbuds in, laptop under his arm. He looked at Raymond the way a busy person looks at a slow one. Raymond explained the situation. Politely, specifically, he pointed at the overlap. Bryce glanced at the Tesla, glanced back. "I'm literally in the middle of a call," he said. "I'll move it when I'm done." He didn't move it until the following morning. Raymond wrote the date, the time, the duration, and a brief description in his notebook. He did not file a complaint, he did not call the police. He went back inside and made dinner. The second time it happened, 2 weeks later, Raymond knocked again. Same polite explanation. Same brush off. This time, Bryce was on a Zoom, couldn't step away, you understand. The third time, Raymond didn't knock. He took a photograph with his phone, logged the time, and called the Buncombe County non-emergency line to ask about the process for documenting a driveway obstruction. The dispatcher told him that a single incident wasn't typically actionable, but persistent obstruction could be. She told him to document everything. Raymond thanked her. He was already doing exactly that. By the end of October 2020, Bryce Weston had blocked Raymond's driveway 9 times, sometimes by an inch, sometimes by 3 feet. Twice fully, Raymond's truck couldn't get out at all. On the 9th incident, Raymond walked over again. This time he brought the notebook. He read Bryce the dates, all 9 of them, the times, the durations, calmly, without raising his voice. Bryce stared at him from the doorway. "Listen, old man," he said, "this isn't your little Marine base, it's a public street. You want to make an issue out of parking, talk to a lawyer." He closed the door. Raymond stood on the step for a moment, nodded once, the way a man nods when he's filed information away and won't be forgetting it. He went home, he picked up his phone and called his brother-in-law, a retired county assessor named Gerald Hooper, and asked him one specific question about property lines on Cedarwood Lane. Gerald's answer made Raymond put down his coffee very slowly. "But we'll get to that. Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever tried to be reasonable with someone who had absolutely no interest in being reasonable? Someone who looked at your patience and saw weakness? Someone who heard your calm voice and decided it meant you had no power? Drop a comment right now and tell me what happened the first time you tried the civil approach with a neighbor like this. Because what happened next on Cedarwood Lane is what happens when the wrong man decides he has nothing more to lose. Through November and December of 2020, the incidents continued. Bryce Weston was not a man who escalated dramatically all at once. He was the kind of man who nudged, who pushed a little further each time to see what the boundary was, who interpreted every absence of immediate consequence as permission. Blocking the driveway became routine, 17 incidents by Christmas, 22 by Valentine's Day 2021. Raymond documented every one. He'd upgraded from his pocket notebook to a dedicated composition book, the kind with the black and white marbled cover that elementary school kids use. He dated every page. He included weather conditions. He photographed the obstruction with his phone at a specific angle so the timestamp, the license plate, and both driveway aprons were visible in a single frame. He organized the photos in dated folders on a laptop his granddaughter had helped him set up the previous spring. He printed the clearest ones and taped them into the composition book in chronological order. But the driveway was just the beginning. In January 2021, Bryce had what he called a smart home system installed, a whole house speaker setup with exterior speakers mounted under the eaves of number 6. On weekend nights and sometimes on weeknights, those speakers ran until 11 midnight, sometimes 1 in the morning. It wasn't music Raymond disliked, it was the volume, and it was the indifference. He filed a noise complaint with the town of Weaverville. The responding officer knocked on Bryce's door. Bryce turned it down. It was back up the following weekend. In February, Bryce had a landscaping crew in, a legitimate crew, doing legitimate work. But the crew parked their trailer partially blocking Raymond's mailbox for 3 days running, and when Raymond mentioned it to Bryce, Bryce told him to contact the landscaping company directly. He provided no contact information. The mailbox issue was minor. Raymond logged it anyway. In March, something changed. Raymond came home from his Tuesday VA appointment to find Corporal, his chocolate lab, barking at the fence that separated the 2 yards. The dog was agitated in a way Raymond recognized, not territorial barking but distress barking. Raymond walked the fence line. He found a small pile of what appeared to be mixed nuts and raisins, both toxic to dogs, scattered near the base of the fence on his side, close enough to the gap between 2 boards that a dog's nose could reach them. Raymond photographed everything. He called the vet, described what he'd found, described Corporal's behavior. The vet said Corporal hadn't eaten them, he was fine, but to watch him overnight. Raymond watched him all night, sat in the armchair by the window with the lights off. In the morning, he added the photographs to the composition book. He added a note in the margin in his small, precise handwriting: intentional, unknown, photograph retained as evidence. He did not go knock on Bryce's door. He did not call the police. He made a phone call instead to a man named Lewis Carver, who had been Raymond's platoon sergeant in Kuwait and was now a retired special agent with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. Lewis Carver listened. He said 2 things. Keep documenting. And don't touch him. Raymond said he understood. By April 2021, the driveway count was at 31. Direct hit now. Let me pause here again, folks. 31 times, 31 mornings or evenings or nights when Raymond Doss, a man who had served 26 years in the United States Marine Corps, who had buried his wife, who tended 12 rose bushes and carved pumpkins with the neighborhood kids, had to figure out how to get his truck out of his own driveway. Have you ever had a neighbor who acted like the rules simply didn't apply to them, like your existence was an inconvenience to their comfort? Tell me in the comments, I want to know. And while you're thinking about that, stay with me, because what I haven't told you yet is what Raymond's brother-in-law Gerald told him back in October. That piece of information is the one that changes everything. The summer of 2021 was hot and dry in Weaverville. The Blue Ridge Mountains went hazy with that particular August heat that makes the hills look like a watercolor left in the rain. The sugar maples on Cedarwood Lane were tired and dusty. The sprinklers ran on timers. Raymond's rose garden along the south fence was, in spite of the heat, thriving. He watered it by hand every morning, not with a hose, but with a watering can, moving from bush to bush the way a man moves through a ritual. He deadheaded the spent blooms with a pair of Carol's gardening shears that still had her initials scratched into the handle with a nail. He talked to the bushes sometimes, quiet words, the way people talk to things they love when they think nobody's listening. The neighbors knew not to bother him during that time of morning. It was his. On August 19, 2021, a Thursday, Raymond left the house at 7:15 a.m. for a doctor's appointment in Asheville annual checkup, the kind the VA schedules a year out and you can't reschedule easily. He left Corporal inside with water and a chew toy. He was gone 4 hours. He came home at 11:30 a.m. and parked on the street. Bryce's Tesla was, of course, across his driveway again, incident number 41, and walked around the side of the house to check the garden before going inside. He stopped at the corner of the house. The south fence line was bare. All 12 rose bushes were gone, not wilted, not damaged, gone, cut at the base, the cuts fresh and clean, the canes removed. The soil had been raked smooth, carefully, deliberately, as if to erase the evidence of what had been there. Raymond stood at the edge of the garden for a very long time. A long still time. Margaret Howell, at her kitchen window across the back fence, saw him standing there. She said later that she'd never seen a man look like that, not angry, not crying, just still. Like something inside him had gone very quiet in the way that comes before a decision. She almost went outside, she didn't. Raymond went inside. He came back out with his phone. He photographed the bare soil. The cut stubs barely visible at ground level, the raked pattern, the fence line. He photographed Bryce's yard from the corner of his property, visible in the corner of the frame, a black contractor bag tied off, sitting by Bryce's back steps. Then he went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and made 3 phone calls. The first was to Lewis Carver. The second was to Gerald Hooper. The third was to a woman named Donna Reyes, an attorney at the Asheville office of Merritt and Reyes, LLP, who specialized in property litigation. He did not call the police yet. He did not knock on Bryce's door. He sat at the kitchen table and opened his composition book and wrote in his small, precise handwriting, August 19, 2021. 11:30 a.m. Rose garden destroyed, all 12 bushes removed, soil raked, evidence, photographs 448-461 in folder, bag observed in subject's yard, witness, neighbor M. Howell, unconfirmed, voluntary. Then he closed the notebook, poured a cup of coffee, and sat at the window where Carol used to sit. If you think Raymond Doss is going to let this go, you've never met a man like Raymond. Here's what nobody knew at the time. Nobody except Raymond and Gerald and Lewis Carver. Let's start with Gerald. Gerald Hooper had served as Buncombe County Assessor for 16 years before retiring in 2015. He knew property records in that county the way other men know their own reflections. When Raymond had called him back in October 2020, the night after Bryce told him to talk to a lawyer, Raymond had asked one very specific question. Gerald, where exactly does my property end and number 6 begin? Gerald had gone quiet for a moment, then he'd pulled up the county parcel records. What he found was this. The current fence line between properties 4 and 6 on Cedarwood Lane did not match the recorded boundary in the county plat. The fence, a 6-foot wooden privacy fence that Bryce's predecessors had installed sometime in the early 2000s, sat 18 inches inside Raymond's legal property line. 18 inches, the full length of the shared yard. In property law, this is called an encroachment. And while the doctrine of adverse possession can sometimes allow a neighbor to claim encroached land after a period of years, that doctrine requires the encroachment to have been open, notorious, continuous, and hostile, and crucially, it requires the property owner's lack of knowledge. Raymond now had knowledge. And Raymond had Gerald write it up in a formal notarized letter, citing the parcel record numbers dated October 28, 2020. That letter had been sitting in the manila folder on Raymond's kitchen counter for nearly a year. Now let's talk about Lewis Carver. Lewis Carver had spent 22 years with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, finishing as a senior special agent in the Financial Crimes Unit before retiring in 2019. He was 64 years old, played golf badly, and was one of 3 men alive whom Raymond Doss would call at midnight without apologizing for the hour. When Raymond had called Lewis in March, after the incident with the raisins near the fence, Lewis had listened carefully and then asked a question Raymond hadn't expected. Bryce Weston, Velometric Analytics. There was a pause. Ray, Lewis said, I need you to send me everything you've got, every photograph, every date, every incident. Raymond asked why. Lewis said, because Velometric Analytics is currently under investigation by the North Carolina Securities Commission for misrepresentation of subscriber metrics in their Series B funding round. $14 million of investor money, and your neighbor is the controlling partner. Raymond was quiet for a moment. You need a witness who's been watching him behave badly, Raymond said. I need a neighbor with impeccable documentation and a history of unanswered good faith attempts to resolve conflicts, Lewis said, which, from what you're describing, is exactly what you are. Raymond looked at the composition book on the counter. I've got 31 incidents documented, he said, photographs, timestamps, dates, descriptions. Lewis Carver made a sound that, in a man with less composure, might have been a laugh. Now at attorney Donna Reyes. Donna Reyes had been practicing property and civil litigation in Buncombe County for 19 years. When Raymond walked into her office on August 20th, the morning after the rose garden, and laid the composition book on her desk, she spent 40 minutes reading it without looking up. When she finished, she looked at him over her reading glasses. Mr. Doss, she said, I want you to understand that you have been, for 14 months, building one of the cleanest civil cases I've seen come across this desk. Raymond told her about the fence line. He showed her Gerald's letter. She made a note on her legal pad. He told her about Lewis Carver and the securities investigation. She put down her pen. "Mr. Doss," she said carefully, "may I ask, did you know any of this when you started documenting?" "No," Raymond said, "I just knew I'd need to be able to prove what happened." She nodded slowly. "That," she said, "is the most useful thing a client has ever said to me." She filed 3 documents the following morning. A civil complaint in Buncombe County Superior Court, Doss v. Weston, alleging property damage, tortious interference, intentional destruction of personal property, and nuisance. Attached to the complaint, 461 photographs, a 47-entry log, Gerald Hooper's notarized property survey letter, and an affidavit from Margaret Howell confirming she had witnessed the state of the garden before and after August 19. A formal encroachment notice demanding removal of the fence within 30 days, with a surveyor's report attached. And a letter to the North Carolina Securities Commission, forwarded through Lewis Carver's contacts, formally offering Raymond Doss as a witness to Bryce Weston's pattern of behavior and character. That was September 2021. Bryce Weston did not know any of this was coming. He was, in the first week of October, posting Instagram content from his Cedarwood Lane porch, Mountain Life Reset. He captioned it with a photo of his Tesla and the autumn maple, and telling his followers he was taking space to realign his vision. On October 14, 2021, he parked across Raymond's driveway for the 48th time. He went inside, he made coffee, he opened his laptop. He had no idea. Direct hit. Let me ask you something, folks. Is there a more satisfying moment in human drama than the moment right before an arrogant man realizes exactly how wrong he was to underestimate a quiet one? That moment was coming on Cedarwood Lane at 7:45 on a Thursday morning. And I want you to picture it clearly, because Raymond Doss had earned every second of it. October 14, 2021, Weaverville, North Carolina. The temperature at 7:30 a.m. was 41 degrees. A thin ground fog lay along the lower end of Cedarwood Lane, the kind of mountain morning fog that burns off by 9 but makes everything before that look like a scene from an old photograph. The sugar maples were at full color, orange and gold and a deep arterial red, the leaves hanging still in the cold air. Raymond Doss was sitting on his front porch steps at 6:03 a.m. when he walked out and saw the Tesla. He'd known it would be there. The composition book had a section in the back where he'd begun to note Bryce's patterns, and Thursday mornings were consistent. He'd made the call to Donna Ray's the night before. He sat down, he opened the manila folder on his knee, he drank his coffee. At 6:47 a.m., a Buncombe County Sheriff's cruiser turned onto Cedarwood Lane and parked 2 houses down. At 7:02 a.m., a second cruiser arrived. At 7:19 a.m., a Weaverville code enforcement vehicle. At 7:31 a.m., a black Chevy Suburban, no markings, federal plates, 2 men in the front in suits that parked across the street. At 7:38 a.m., Donna Ray's arrived in a gray Volvo, carrying a leather portfolio and a cup of coffee, and sat next to Raymond on the porch steps. "It's a beautiful street," she said. "Yes," Raymond said, "Carol picked it." They didn't say much else. At 7:44 a.m., the front door of number 6 opened. Bryce Weston stepped out in a gray Patagonia quarter zip and flannel pajama pants. He was carrying a matte black travel mug. He appeared to be on a phone call, one earbud in, gesturing slightly as he talked. He didn't see the cruisers immediately. He walked down his porch steps toward the Tesla, presumably to move it before his morning run, still talking. Then he stopped. He saw the first cruiser. Then the second. Then the code enforcement vehicle. Then the Suburban. He took the earbud out. He turned and saw Raymond on the porch steps, and Donna Ray's beside him, who gave him a brief, professional nod. Bryce Weston stood in his driveway in his flannel pajama pants and said nothing for several seconds. Then one of the deputies walked over, a tall man named Deputy Aaron Fitzgerald, who had been briefed the previous afternoon, and politely explained to Bryce that he was being served with civil papers in the matter of Doss v. Weston, Buncombe County Superior Court, and that there was additionally a code enforcement citation being issued for the vehicle currently obstructing a private driveway apron, the 48th such documented occurrence. Donna Reyes stood and walked to the property line. She handed Bryce a second set of documents, the encroachment notice with the surveyor's report, formally notifying him that the fence along the south property line of 6 Cedarwood Lane sat 18 inches inside the legal property of 4 Cedarwood Lane and must be removed within 30 days or the matter would proceed to court. The two men from the Suburban crossed the street. They produced credentials, North Carolina Securities Commission, working in conjunction with the State Bureau of Investigation. They had questions for Mr. Weston regarding velometric analytics and its Series B funding disclosure documents. They were not arresting him, not yet, they were careful to say. They were inviting him to a voluntary interview. But the subpoena attached to the invitation was not voluntary. Bryce Weston looked at the papers, at the deputies, at the men from the Suburban, at Donna Reyes who had returned to the porch steps. Then he looked at Raymond. Raymond Doss was looking out at the street, at the maple trees, at the fog burning off over the lower end of the lane. He took a slow sip of coffee. He didn't look at Bryce. He didn't need to. By 8:15 a.m., code enforcement had photographed the Tesla's position and issued a citation. Obstruction of private driveway apron, 47 prior documented incidents attached as exhibits, civil fine $200 per incident escalating schedule, total assessed, $18,600, plus the current incident. Bryce's attorney reached by phone, arrived by 10 o'clock and spent 20 minutes talking with the Securities Commission agents in a hushed conversation on the sidewalk. At 11:30 a.m., Bryce Weston drove away in the Tesla. He did not come back to Cedarwood Lane that day. 3 weeks later, the fence along the south property line of number 6 came down, not by Bryce's choice, but by court order following an emergency hearing. A crew removed it on a Tuesday morning in November. Raymond supervised from his yard, saying nothing, a cup of coffee in his hand. The civil suit, Doss v. Weston, went to mediation in March 2022. Bryce's attorneys, facing 461 documented photographs and a 47-entry log and an encroachment notice and a securities investigation as backdrop context, recommended settlement. The settlement was sealed, but Donna Reyes, who is permitted to say the amount was significant, mentioned to a colleague that it was the largest residential nuisance settlement her firm had processed in 11 years. Sources familiar with the matter, and Weaverville is a small town, and people talk, put the figure at somewhere in the range of $847,000 in damages, legal fees, fence removal costs, and assessed civil fines. Raymond Doss declined to comment publicly. He sent Donna Reyes a handmade Adirondack chair. After the deputies left that October morning, the street went quiet in a particular way. The kind of quiet that happens after something has shifted. Margaret Howell came out to her porch at 8:30 a.m., ostensibly to refill her bird feeder, and stood there for a while looking at the cruisers turning around at the end of the lane. The Garcias came out. David Garcia, who was a contractor and had watched the whole thing from his truck, walked over to Raymond's porch around 9 o'clock and said simply, "Good." That was all. Raymond nodded. Over the following weeks, the neighborhood processed what had happened the way neighborhoods do, in small words, over fences, in the parking lot of the grocery store, in the particular shorthand of people who have lived near each other for years. Nobody said much directly to Bryce. He came and went from number 6 less frequently, the Tesla appearing only on weekends, the exterior speakers silent. He stopped making eye contact on the rare occasions he was outside. Nobody waved. Not a two-finger lift, not a real wave, nothing. In February 2022, 4 months after that October morning, a moving truck appeared at number 6. Not the white glove Apex truck, a regular one. Bryce was not there. A property management company representative supervised the removal of furniture, crated art, the exterior speakers. Number 6 went back on the market in March. It sold quickly. Nobody on Cedarwood Lane was sorry to see the listing go live. Nobody watched the truck leave. The North Carolina Securities Commission completed its investigation into velometric analytics in the spring of 2022. The findings were not kind to Bryce Weston. The investigation determined that Velometric's Series B funding pitch had materially overstated subscriber engagement metrics by a factor that regulators described as significant and deliberate. $14 million in investor funds had been raised on the basis of those numbers. Bryce Weston and his co-founder entered into a consent order with the commission in September 2022. Bryce paid $2.3 million in disgorgement and civil penalties. Velometric was dissolved. The Crunchbase profile was deleted. The Charlotte loft was sold. The Instagram account went private, then silent. Raymond heard all of this secondhand through Lewis Carver mostly, and through the way news travels in a small mountain county. He didn't celebrate. He didn't comment. He planted new rose bushes along the south fence line in April 2022. After the encroachment fence came down, he had 18 additional inches of yard he hadn't had before. He put in 14 bushes this time, one for each year since Carol's diagnosis, 12 red, 2 white. He named the white ones for himself. The new neighbors at number 6 were a couple in their 30s, Alina and Marcus Webb, both teachers at the Weaverville Middle School. They arrived in a sensible blue minivan and carried their own boxes. Marcus introduced himself the first day with a handshake that was firm and direct. Raymond gave them a banana bread. Marcus ate 2 slices on the front porch before they'd even finished unloading. By the following summer, Marcus was helping Raymond in the workshop on Saturday mornings, learning to build Adirondack chairs. His first finished one went on their own porch. Raymond told him it was the best first chair he'd ever seen, which Marcus knew wasn't true, but which was kind, and which was the point. Corporal, the chocolate lab, loved Marcus Webb immediately and completely, which Raymond took as the highest possible endorsement. The composition book with the 47 entries went into a file box in Raymond's hall closet next to his service records and his Purple Heart citation. He didn't look at it again. He didn't need to. The rose bushes along the south fence bloomed red and white in June, in the long light of the mountain evening, when the Blue Ridge went soft and golden and the smell of cut grass came through the screen doors left open to the breeze. And that, as much as anything, was justice. You know, I've told a lot of stories on this channel. And I've thought about why the ones that stick, the ones you remember, are always the ones about quiet men. Not the loudest man in the room, not the one making the threats or the promises or the scene, the quiet one. Raymond Doss didn't raise his voice once in 14 months. He didn't vandalize the Tesla. He didn't confront Bryce Weston on the lawn. He didn't post anything on social media. He didn't tell his story to anyone who didn't need to hear it for a specific reason. He did what 26 years in the Corps had taught him to do. He documented, he waited. He trusted the process not because he was passive, but because he understood that patience is a weapon when it's aimed correctly. He understood something Bryce Weston never did and never will. Dignity is not weakness. Silence is not defeat. And a man who has seen real loss, who has stood in rubble and grief and come home anyway, who has buried the person he loved most and still gets up and waters the roses, that man cannot be broken by a parking space. You see, folks, Bryce Weston looked at Raymond Doss and saw an old man, a quiet man, a man who knocked politely and spoke calmly and went back inside without making a scene. He mistook the stillness for emptiness. He was wrong. The notebook on the kitchen counter, the manila folder on the porch steps, the phone calls, one to a brother-in-law who knew every property record in the county, one to a retired SBI agent, one to an attorney. That's not luck, that's a man who has spent 61 years learning how to fight when fighting matters. So let me leave you with this. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak one. Never mistake patience for permission. And never ever pick a fight with a veteran who has already survived things that would have ended you. Raymond Doss is still on Cedarwood Lane. He still makes the banana bread. He still carves pumpkins in October with the kids from the block. He still tends the roses, 14 of them now, red and white, blooming every June along the south fence line where the sun hits in the afternoon. He doesn't think about Bryce Weston. He doesn't need to. Some mornings he sits on the porch steps with his coffee and looks out at the maple trees and the quiet street. And if you walked by and didn't know the story, you'd just see a retired Marine in a flannel shirt, watching the morning burn the fog off the lane. You'd have no idea what he'd built quietly over 14 months. You'd have no idea what he was capable of. That's exactly how Raymond Doss likes it. This story is inspired by real events and public court records. Names, locations, and specific details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental.